You touch a rifle on my base, Carter, and I'll break every finger on your hand before you chamber around. Chief Ryan Kane said it with a smile, then drove his boot down onto the radios scattered across Ava's workbench, crushing them one by one, while the whole tent watched and no one moved. He grabbed her by the collar, hauled her half out of her chair, and shoved her back down like she was trash he couldn't be bothered to throw out. Your support staff, you're nobody. You charge batteries and you shut your mouth. And the woman who would drop 10 enemy snipers alone in 18 minutes just lowered her eyes, went still, and let him believe every word he said. Before we go any further, I want to ask you one small favor. If stories about the underestimated finally getting their moment mean something to you, take 1 second right now and subscribe to the channel. Stay with me all the way to the end of this one, because the ending changes everything you think you know about the quiet woman standing in that tent. And do me a kindness. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from so I can see just how far Ava's story has traveled tonight. Now let's begin. The morning Ava Carter arrived at Forward Operating Base Liberty, not a single person shook her hand. That was the first thing she noticed, and she noticed everything. A convoy of dusty vehicles had rolled her in with the last of the resupply, and while the ammunition got a security detail and the medical crates got 2 men signing for every box, Ava got a duffel bag over her shoulder and a corporal pointing vaguely toward a plywood building. "Comms is that way," he said, already walking off. "Try not to get lost." She didn't get lost. She had memorized the layout of the base from the aerial photographs during the flight in the way her father had taught her to memorize things when she was 9 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with a topographical map spread out between the cereal boxes. She knew where the fuel depot was. She knew the base had exactly one blind spot along the eastern wall where the guard towers couldn't quite see. She knew without being told that the third building on the left had a generator that would fail before the others because the exhaust was pointed into the prevailing wind. She knew these things the way other people knew their own phone numbers, automatically, without effort, without wanting to. And that was the problem, because Ava Carter had made a promise she had carried like a stone in her chest for 11 years, ever since she was 15, and sitting beside a hospital bed, holding a hand that was getting colder by the hour. Her mother had been dying slowly the way cancer takes people in pieces in weeks, that stretched out too long and then collapsed all at once. And near the very end, when the morphine had made her mother's voice soft and far away, the woman had gripped Ava's fingers with a strength that seemed impossible for a body that thin. "Promise me," her mother had whispered. "Anything, Mama. Never touch a rifle again. Never." Her mother's eyes had swum up out of the fog, suddenly sharp, suddenly present, suddenly terrified. "Your father made me a widow the day he first held one. I won't let it make me a mother who buried her daughter too. Promise me you'll never follow him. Promise me you'll be nobody. Be safe. Be nobody." And Ava had promised. Be nobody. Be safe. Be nobody. She had built an entire life out of those 3 words. She had chosen the quietest job the military offered. She had learned to make herself small in rooms to keep her eyes down to answer questions in as few syllables as possible. She had spent 11 years pretending she couldn't see what she saw, couldn't calculate what she calculated, couldn't feel her hands aching for a weight they had never actually held, but somehow already knew. She had spent 11 years being nobody. And she was very, very good at it. The comms building smelled like hot electronics and instant coffee, and the man who ran it, a heavy-set sergeant named Boyle, looked up at her with the expression of a man who had ordered a wrench and been sent a spoon. "You're the new specialist," he said. "Yes, Sergeant." "You know your way around a relay setup." "Yes, Sergeant." He grunted. "We'll see." He waved at a corner desk buried under cable spools and dead radios. "That's yours. Fix the ones you can log, the ones you can't." And Carter. He pointed a thick finger at her without looking up from his own screen. "This is a SEAL forward base. These men do the real work out there. We keep the lights on for them. Nobody out here cares about your opinions. You keep your head down and you do your job, we'll get along fine." "Understood, Sergeant." She sat down at the corner desk. She picked up the first dead radio, and within 90 seconds she had found the problem, a corroded contact that 3 other technicians had missed, and she had it fixed and logged before Boyle had finished his coffee. She did not mention this. Being nobody meant you never mentioned it. The trouble Ava was learning was that being nobody on a SEAL base wasn't a shield. It was a target. She figured that out on her third day when Chief Ryan Kane decided she existed. Kane was everything the recruiting posters promised and everything the posters left out. He was tall, broad magnetic, the kind of man who filled a doorway on purpose. The younger operators orbited him like planets. He had the kind of confidence that came from being genuinely good at a dangerous job and the kind of cruelty that came from never once being told no. He found her in the mess tent alone at the end of a bench, eating fast the way people eat when they're hoping to finish before anyone notices them. "Well, look at this," he announced to the whole tent. "The coffee girl eats too." A few of his men laughed, not all of them. Ava kept eating. "Hey." He sat down across from her, straddling the bench backwards, crowding into her space. "I'm talking to you. What's your name?" "Carter, Chief." "Carter." He said it like it tasted bad. "You know what we do here, Carter? We go outside the wire. We hunt men who want to kill us, and we win every single time because we are the best there has ever been at it. You know what you do?" He picked up her canteen, uncapped it, took a long drink, and set it back down, wet with his own mouth. "You keep the batteries charged. That's the food chain, Carter. I hunt. You charge batteries. Don't ever get those two confused." Ava looked at his hands. They were shaking, just slightly, a fine tremor he was probably not aware of. Too much caffeine, too little sleep. A man running on the edge of something and mistaking it for strength. She looked at the way he'd sat down. Back to the door. She would never have sat with her back to a door. Her father would have cuffed her for it. She looked at the tension in his shoulders and knew the way she knew the generator would fail first that Ryan Kane was afraid of something and had decided to spend that fear on her. "Understood, Chief," is all she said. "Understood, Chief," he mimicked, high and mocking. His men laughed again, more of them this time. "Yeah, charge my batteries, Carter." He stood up, knocking the bench so her water sloshed. "And clean up your area. Place looks like a support unit lives there." He walked off. The laughter followed him. Ava sat very still and finished her food. Her heart was calm. Her hands were steady. That was the thing nobody understood about her, the thing that would have terrified them if they'd bothered to look. Insults didn't make her hands shake. Nothing made her hands shake. She had been built from the age of 5 to be the stillest thing in any room. Stillness was the whole point. Stillness was where the shot came from. And somewhere across the mess tent, an older man with gray at his temples and 4 stripes of authority on his sleeve watched Ryan Kane humiliate the new communications specialist and watched the communications specialist not flinch, not even once, and felt something cold slide down the back of his neck. Master Chief Donovan Hayes had seen that exact stillness before, once, in a man named Daniel Carter. The days that followed formed a pattern Ava recognized from her childhood. From every school she'd ever been the new kid at, from every base she'd ever been the invisible woman on. The pattern went like this. First they ignore you, then one of them decides you're a target, then the rest follow because it's easier to laugh at the outsider than to risk becoming one. Kane made sure the pattern moved fast. He gave her the worst duties. She hauled gear across the base in the worst heat of the day. She was pulled off her actual work, the repairs she was genuinely gifted at, to do the jobs the junior enlisted men didn't want. When a latrine flooded, Kane suggested loudly that the coffee girl handle it. When a shipment of radios arrived, he had her carry every crate herself, while 3 men stood and watched and offered advice. She did all of it. She said, "Understood, Chief," and she did all of it, and she kept her eyes down, and she was nobody, nobody, nobody. But there was one thing she couldn't turn off, and it was the thing that gave her away to the one man watching closely. She read the ground. She couldn't help it. She'd be crossing the yard with a crate in her arms, and her eyes would climb to the ridgeline on the eastern horizon, and she'd think without meaning to, 400 meters slight uphill wind, a shooter up there could put a round through the fuel depot before anyone even heard the crack. She'd walk past the motor pool and her brain would map the sight lines, mark the dead ground, calculate exactly where a man would have to stand to be invisible from the towers. She scanned the high places the way other people breathed, and Master Chief Hayes saw her do it. He saw it the first day and he told himself it was nothing. He saw it the second day and he told himself he was imagining things. By the 5th day, he stopped telling himself anything because he had spent 30 years in this business and he knew what he was looking at. He was looking at a sniper who didn't know she was one, Or worse, one who knew and had decided for reasons he couldn't fathom to bury it under a communications specialist uniform and a downcast pair of eyes. That night, alone in his quarters, Hayes opened the small footlocker he had carried to every posting for a decade. Beneath the spare boots and the folded flag wrapped in oilcloth was an envelope. The paper had gone soft with age. On the front, in a hard, slanting hand he would have recognized anywhere, was written a single word: Ishfo, Ava. Hayes did not open it. He had promised he wouldn't, unless the day came. He turned it over in his weathered hands and remembered the last time he had seen Daniel Carter alive. It had been 11 years ago on a rooftop in a country whose name never made the news. Carter, the man they called the Ghost, because he could be within 400 meters of you for 6 hours and you'd never know, until the world went dark, had pressed this envelope into Hayes's hand and said something Hayes had not understood at the time. "If you ever meet a woman who reads the high ground like she was born on it," Carter had said, "and she's got my last name and she's pretending she can't do what she can do, you find a way to be near her. Because it means the war finally reached her too. And she's going to need somebody who knew her old man. She's going to need somebody who can tell her it's all right." Then Daniel Carter had gone out for one more shot, one more mission, and the Ghost had finally been caught by a younger, luckier hunter, and the envelope had sat in a footlocker for 11 years. Until Forward Operating Base Liberty. Until a quiet woman named Carter walked across the yard and lifted her eyes to the ridge without even knowing she'd done it. Hayes put the envelope back and closed the footlocker and did not sleep much that night. The thing about a base that runs on disrespect is that it runs poorly. Ava saw it the way she saw everything all at once, whole. She saw that Kane's contempt for support staff meant that nobody double-checked the comms logs he found beneath him. She saw that the junior men who spent their energy laughing at her spent less of it on the tedious life-saving details of soldiering. She saw a base that was very good at the exciting parts of war and getting sloppy at the quiet parts. And it was always the quiet parts, her father used to say, that got you killed. "The bullet that kills you," Daniel Carter had told her when she was 7, holding a spent brass casing up to the light, "is the one you never bothered to look for." So Ava looked, even though she wasn't supposed to, even though her whole life was built on not looking. She couldn't stop her eyes. And that was why when the intelligence briefing about the eastern sector filtered down to the comms tent 9 days after she arrived, Ava went cold all the way through. She wasn't supposed to be in the briefing. She was there to fix a malfunctioning speaker crouched in the corner with a screwdriver made invisible again by everyone's assumption that she couldn't understand what she was hearing. Commander Mitchell, the base commander, a serious and careful man Ava had already decided she respected, was laying out a convoy mission. "Route runs through the Ashuran Valley," Mitchell said. "Resupply for the outpost at the far end. Standard mission. 3 vehicles, security element in and out." "Threat assessment?" someone asked. "That's the good news," Mitchell said. "This sector's been quiet for 3 weeks. No contact, no chatter, no movement. Cold as a grave out there." Ava's screwdriver stopped moving. 3 weeks of silence. She stared at the speaker in her hands and did not see it. She saw a map. She saw the Asheron Valley, which she had memorized, like she memorized everything. A narrow throat of ground with high ridge lines running down both sides and one predictable road along the bottom. She saw a place where a convoy would have no cover and no maneuvering room and no way out except forward or back, both of which could be sealed. And she heard her father's voice clear, as if he were crouched beside her. 3 weeks of silence isn't peace, Ava. 3 weeks of silence is somebody being patient, somebody letting you get comfortable. The quietest ground is the ground somebody's saving. She knew the way she knew nothing else in her life that the Ashuran Valley was a trap, that the silence was bait, that somebody had spent 3 weeks not shooting so that the Americans would decide the sector was cold and drive 3 vehicles down the throat of a kill zone with their guard down. She knew it the way she knew her own name. And she was a communications specialist crouched in the corner with a screwdriver, and she had no right to say a word. Ava stood up. Her heart, which never raced, was racing now. "Sir," she said. The tent went quiet. Every man turned. Commander Mitchell blinked at her as if a chair had spoken. "The valley," Ava said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Sir, the silence in that sector. I don't think it's peace. I think it's preparation." For one long second, nobody said anything. Then Ryan Kane laughed. It was a sharp, ugly, disbelieving sound, and it broke the spell, and half the tent laughed with him. "Oh, this is beautiful," Kane said, wiping his eye. "The battery girls got an intel assessment. Go on, Carter. Tell the SEAL command element how to fight a war. Tell us all about the tactical situation. What did you read it on the coffee grounds?" More laughter. Ava felt her face burning, but her voice stayed level, because if there was one thing 11 years of being nobody had taught her, it was how to keep speaking while the room laughed at her. "The ridge lines run 500 to 700 meters on both sides," she said. "The road has no cover for the middle 2 kilometers. If someone wanted to trap a convoy, that's where they'd do it. And 3 weeks of quiet is exactly how long you'd stay silent if you wanted us to stop watching." "Enough," Kane snapped, and now he wasn't laughing. Now he was angry because a support specialist had just spoken longer and cleaner than he'd expected, and something in the confidence of it had scraped against him. "You're out of your lane, Carter. Way out. Sit down, shut up, and fix the speaker." Ava looked at Commander Mitchell. Mitchell looked back at her for a moment that lasted a heartbeat too long. And in that heartbeat, Ava saw something flicker in his eyes, not belief, but not quite dismissal either. The look of a careful man who has heard something he can't fully explain. Then the moment passed, because a base commander cannot rewrite a mission on the say-so of a communications specialist with no combat record, no intelligence training, and no reason on earth to be listened to. "Noted Specialist Carter," Mitchell said, not unkindly. "But the assessment stands. The mission's a go." He turned back to his officers. "Wheels up at 0600. Ava sat down. Her hands, for once in her life, were not quite steady. She looked at the speaker and did not see it. Across the tent, Master Chief Hayes was looking at her, and he was not laughing and he was not dismissing her, and his face had gone the color of ash. Because he had just watched Daniel Carter's daughter eat a battlefield off a briefing map she'd only heard described out loud and reach the exact conclusion the ghost himself would have reached and be laughed out of the room for it. And a cold certainty settled into Donovan Hayes' chest like a stone dropping into deep water. The war had reached her, just like her father said it would. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She lay on her cot in the corner. She'd been given a curtained-off nook near the comms equipment, and she stared at the plywood ceiling, and she did the thing she had trained herself never to do. She let herself think about her father. She had been 5 the first time he'd taken her out to the ridge behind their house with an old pair of binoculars. Not a rifle, never a rifle, not yet, and taught her to read the wind. By the way it moved through the tall grass, she had thought it was a game. She had loved it because it was time with him, because he was gone so often and so long. And when he was home, he was quiet and far away, like he'd left part of himself in whatever country he'd come back from. But those days on the ridge, he was present. He would crouch beside her and point and say, "What do you see, Ava? Not what you're looking at. What do you see?" And she would tell him the way the deer only crossed at the low saddle where the wind was in their favor. The way a man on the far hill couldn't see the creek bottom no matter how hard he looked. The way distance made a thing look slower than it moved. And her father would nod slow and serious and say, "Good, that's my girl, that's the eye." The eye, that's what he called it. Not a skill, an eye, something you were born with and then spent your life sharpening. Her mother had hated it. Her mother had understood long before Ava did exactly where the eye led. It led to the rooftop where a younger, luckier hunter finally caught the ghost. It led to a folded flag and a widow at 40 and a 15-year-old girl making a promise beside a hospital bed. Be nobody, be safe, be nobody. Ava rolled over on the cot and pressed her palm flat against her own sternum, feeling her heart beat slow and even, the heart that never raced, and she hated it. She hated the eye. She hated the calm. She hated the way she'd read the Asheron Valley off a map and known that men were going to die there in a few hours, and there was nothing she could do about it because she'd made herself nobody so completely that when she finally saw the thing that mattered, no one would believe her. "I kept my promise, Mama," she whispered to the plywood ceiling. "I kept it. I've kept it every single day." And her father's voice, unbidden, unwanted, answered in the dark. "The bullet that kills you is the one you never bothered to look for." She had looked. That was the terrible thing. She had looked, and she had seen it, and she had told them, and they had laughed. At 0400, 2 hours before the convoy was scheduled to roll, a runner came for her. Carter, Boyle wants you. There's a change to the mission tasking. Ava was already awake. She'd never gone to sleep. She pulled on her boots and followed the runner to the comms tent, where Sergeant Boyle was standing over a map with a mug of coffee gone cold in his hand. Change of plan, Boyle said. Command wants a forward relay station set up in the valley to keep comms solid through the whole run. Dead ground eats the signal otherwise. They need somebody who can babysit the equipment and troubleshoot on the fly. He looked at her, and there was something almost like an apology in his tired face. That's you. You're the best I've got with a relay, Carter. Even Kane admits it, though he'd rather chew glass than say it. Ava looked at the map. She saw where Boyle's finger was pointing. The relay position was in the valley, not at either end where the ridges tapered, and there was room to run. In the middle, in the throat, in the exact center of the kill zone she had described 12 hours earlier, the place she had stood in that tent and said men would die if a trap was waiting. Sergeant, she said very quietly, this position, it's in the worst possible place. It's where the signal needs it, Boyle said. Look, Carter, I don't love it either, but it's a quiet sector. 3 weeks of nothing. You'll be in and out with the convoy. Set up the relay, keep it running for the transit window. Tear it down, come home. He drained the cold coffee and made a face. It's a milk run. You'll be fine. Ava looked at the map at the little mark in the center of the throat and felt the whole shape of the thing close around her like a hand. She had told them the valley was a trap, and they had laughed at her. And now they were sending her of all people to sit alone at the very bottom of it, at the one point where a shooter on the ridge would have the cleanest angle in the world. If she was right about the trap, she was being sent to die at the center of it, and she couldn't say no. A communications specialist did not refuse a tasking. If she refused, she would be relieved, investigated, disgraced. Everything she had built, the whole careful architecture of being nobody would collapse, and they still wouldn't believe her. Understood, Sergeant, Ava heard herself say. Boyle nodded, relieved, already moving on to the next thing. Good, gear up. You roll with the security element. And Carter, he paused. For what it's worth, I read your assessment log from the briefing. About the silence. He rubbed his face. Probably nothing, but I flagged it up the chain anyway, so somebody up there's seen it at least. It was the first kind thing anyone on the base had said to her. Ava held on to it. She gathered her gear in the pre-dawn dark. Relay equipment, batteries, a sidearm she had qualified with and never fired at anything but paper. And her hands as she checked the equipment one last time were steady. Of course they were steady. They were always steady. But there was a feeling in her chest she hadn't felt in 11 years. A low electric hum beneath the calm, and it took her a moment to recognize it because she had worked so hard to forget it. It was the feeling of the ridge, the feeling of her father crouched beside her in the tall grass, the feeling of the eye opening. She shoved it down. She was going out to babysit a radio. Nothing more. Be nobody. Be safe. Be nobody. Out in the yard, the convoy was forming up in the dark engines, low men checking weapons. Ava climbed into her assigned vehicle and found herself sitting across from Ryan Kane, who was leading the security element personally. He looked at her and his lip curled. Great, he said. The intel expert's coming with us. You gonna read us the coffee grounds on the way out, Carter? Ava said nothing. Just stay out of the way when the real work happens, Kane said, checking his rifle with quick practiced hands. If we hit anything, which we won't, you sit in your hole and you keep your head down and you let the operators handle it. You understand me. This is my element. You're a passenger. Ava looked at his hands on the rifle. Good hands, fast hands, the hands of a genuinely dangerous man. She looked at the way he'd loaded up heavy on ammunition light, and on water the loadout of a man expecting a short, violent day and not a long, thirsty one. She looked at the confidence radiating off him, and she thought about the ridge lines waiting in the dark 500 to 700 meters, patient, silent for 3 weeks. She thought he has no idea what's up there. None of them do. And a second thought came, an unwanted cold from the deepest part of her, the part that was her father's daughter, no matter how many promises she'd made. I do. The convoy rolled out through the gate as the sky went gray at the edges. 3 vehicles, a security element of hardened SEAL operators led by a man who thought Ava Carter was a mail slot with a haircut, and 1 communications specialist riding to the center of a kill zone she had seen coming and been laughed at for seeing. The base fell away behind them. The road unspooled ahead straight and predictable into the throat of the Ashuran Valley. Master Chief Donovan Hayes watched the taillights disappear from the guard tower where he'd been standing since 3 in the morning, unable to sleep. The soft old envelope with the single word Ava written on it tucked inside his jacket close to his chest. He didn't know why he'd brought it up to the tower. He just knew he couldn't leave it in the footlocker anymore. He watched the dust settle on the empty road and he thought about a rooftop 11 years ago, and a man's voice saying it means the war finally reached her too. And Donovan Hayes, who had prayed exactly twice in 30 years of soldiering, both times over dying men, bowed his head in the gray dawn and prayed a third time. Not that nothing would happen in the valley. He prayed that if something did, the girl would remember who she was in time. The convoy entered the valley at 0640. The ridge lines rose up on both sides 500 to 700 meters exactly as she'd said. The road ran straight down the middle, no cover, exactly as she'd said. In the silence, the 3-week silence wrapped around the vehicles like held breath. Ava's team peeled off at the relay point, the little mark in the center of the throat. 2 men helped her unload the equipment and then rejoined the convoy, which pushed on ahead toward the outpost, leaving Ava and a single junior operator named Diaz to guard the relay while the SEALs completed the run. Diaz was maybe 22. He grinned at her as they set up the antenna. "So you're the one who said this place was a trap, huh?" he said, not mocking, just curious. "Yes," Ava said. Diaz looked around at the empty valley, the still air, the road baking in the early light. "Looks pretty quiet to me." Ava lifted her eyes to the ridgeline. She scanned it slow and total, the way her father had taught her at 5 years old, not looking at it, but seeing it, and her heart, her calm and steady heart, began at last quietly to race. Because up on the northern ridge, at what her eye placed instantly, at 390 meters, a single bird had just burst up out of the rocks and flown away fast and low. Something had spooked it. Something up there. Something that had been holding perfectly still for a long, long time and had just shifted its weight. "Diaz," Ava said, and her voice had changed. All the softness, all the nobody gone out of it. Get down right now." "What? Why, what are you?" The first shot broke the silence of 3 weeks, like the crack of the world ending, and it took Diaz's radio out of his hands before the sound even finished. And Ava Carter understood in the space between one heartbeat and the next that she had been right about everything, and that being right was going to cost every single thing she had promised her dying mother she would never, ever pay. The second shot came before the first had finished echoing, and it punched through the relay antenna Ava had just finished raising, folding the metal like it was made of paper. Diaz was screaming something, diving for the shallow depression beside the equipment cases, and Ava was already down, already flat, already moving on instincts she had spent 11 years pretending she didn't have. Her body knew what to do before her mind gave the order. Get low, get behind mass, find the angle. Her cheek pressed into the dirt, and her eyes went up to the ridgeline, and in the space of a single breath, she counted muzzle flashes. 1, 2, 3 on the northern ridge, 2 just on the southern, and more she couldn't see yet, more she could only feel the way you feel a storm before the rain. "They're on both sides," she said, and her voice came out flat and cold and clear, a voice Diaz had never heard from the quiet woman who fixed radios. Northern ridge 3 shooters, southern ridge at least 2. They caught the convoy in the open. Diaz stared at her, his face white blood running from where a rock splinter had opened his cheek. "How do you—" "Radio," Ava snapped. "Diaz, the radio. Can it still transmit?" He looked at the shattered antenna at the relay set she had bled to build, now a smoking ruin. "It's gone. The antenna's gone. We've got nothing. Half a kilometer up the road, the convoy was dying. Ava couldn't see all of it, but she could hear it, and hearing was enough. She heard the vehicles take fire. She heard the heavy thump of something bigger than a rifle. She heard men shouting positions and calling for cover and calling names, and she heard the particular sound that a firefight makes when one side has the high ground and the other side has nowhere to go, and it is not a sound of battle. It is a sound of slaughter. The trap had closed exactly where she'd said it would. Exactly. And she was at the bottom of it with a dead radio and a wounded kid and a sidearm she had never fired at a living thing. Up on the road, Ryan Kane was learning what fear tasted like. He had taken cover behind the lead vehicle's engine block, and rounds were chewing the metal apart 6 inches above his head, and 2 of his men were down in the open, and he could not reach them. Corporal Reyes was screaming for a medic with a hole in his thigh you could put a fist through. Sergeant Whitmore had stopped screaming, which was worse. And Kane, who had told a communications specialist 12 hours ago that this was a milk run, that she should read it on the coffee grounds, pressed himself into the dirt behind a burning truck and understood that everything she had said was true. Contact, contact, we are in a kill zone, he was yelling into his radio. Multiple shooters, elevated positions. We need air right now. The answer came back through static, and it was the worst answer in the world. Copy your contact. Air support is scrambling. Time on target is 45 minutes. 45 minutes. Kane looked at Reyes bleeding out in the dirt. He looked at Whitmore not moving. He looked at the ridgeline spitting fire down onto his men from angles he couldn't return, and he did the math that every operator eventually does, and the math said 45 minutes was longer than any of them had. They knew, he said, to no one to himself, his voice cracking. They knew our route. They've been sitting up there for weeks. She knew, and a round cracked past his ear, and he stopped talking and started praying. Back at the relay position, Ava was doing the thing she was built for. The thing she hated, the thing she could not stop. She was reading the battlefield. Her eyes moved across the northern ridge, and her mind laid a grid over it without permission, and every muzzle flash became a coordinate, a distance, a firing solution. The shooter at the rock outcrop 390 meters, the one whose bird she'd spotted. The one in the dead pine 410 taking his time, a patient man, a good shooter. The one lower down near the scree, 290, the closest, the most aggressive. Her father's voice moved through her like a current. Range them, prioritize them. The aggressive one first, then the patient one, then the far one. The patient ones think they have time. Take away their time. She caught herself doing it, and it terrified her more than the bullets did. Stop, she whispered. Stop it. Because there was a rifle 12 feet away from her. She had seen it the instant she went to ground. One of the men who dropped her at the relay, a SEAL sniper who'd stayed behind to overwatch the position, had been hit in the opening volley and was down in the dead ground to her left, and his rifle had spilled from his hands into the dirt between them. A long gun, a precision weapon. The thing her whole life had been arranged around never touching. She could see it. She could see the whole solution. Reach it, get behind it, put steel on those shooters before they finished the convoy. Her hands ached for it. Her body leaned toward it without her telling it to. Be nobody. Be safe. Be nobody. Promise me you'll never follow him. I promise, Mama. Ava pressed her face into the dirt and squeezed her eyes shut and did not reach for the rifle. 90 seconds passed. In a firefight, 90 seconds is a lifetime, and it is the difference between many lives and none. Diaz was crawling toward the downed sniper, trying to reach him, trying to check if he was alive, and a round hit the dirt inches from his hand and drove him back. He's alive, Diaz shouted. Carter, he's alive. I can see him breathing, but I can't reach him. They've got the whole gap covered. Ava lifted her head just enough to look. The downed SEAL was breathing. And more than that, his eyes were open, and they were fixed on her, and his lips were moving, and Ava read the words off them the way her father had taught her to read everything. Take the shot. He knew. Somehow bleeding in the dirt with his weapon spilled beside a communications specialist, this man knew what he was looking at. Maybe he'd heard about the intel assessment. Maybe he just saw the way her eyes tracked the ridge. But he knew, and he was giving her his rifle with his dying breath, and he was telling her to do the one thing she had sworn on her mother's deathbed she would never do. I can't, Ava whispered. Tears cut through the dirt on her face. I can't, I promised, I can't. Up the road, someone died. She heard it. She heard the shouting message, heard a man's name called, and then called again, with a different sound, the sound of a name becoming a memory. Whitmore's gone, a voice cracked over the ruined air. Whitmore's gone. We're losing people. Where the hell is that air? 43 minutes to air support. 43 minutes for 10 shooters on the high ground to work their way through a pinned security element one man at a time. And Ava Carter lay in the dirt at the bottom of the kill zone and had the exact conversation with herself that she had been avoiding for 11 years. She thought about her mother, thin and gray in the hospital bed, gripping her hand, terrified. She thought about the promise. She had kept it for 11 years. She had built a whole self out of keeping it. She had been nobody so faithfully, so completely, that when it mattered most, no one would listen to her. And then she thought about something her mother had never known. Her mother had made her promise never to become her father because her mother believed her father's gift was a kind of death. That the eye, the calm, the steady hands, that all of it led only to widows and folded flags. And maybe that was true. Maybe it had been true for Daniel Carter. But there was another version. There was the version where the gift wasn't for taking lives. It was for saving them. There were men dying up that road right now. Good men, young men like Diaz, men with mothers of their own who would get folded flags, and the only thing on this entire battlefield that could stop it was lying 12 feet away in the hands of a dying man who was begging her to pick it up. Her mother had said, "Be nobody, so you'll be safe." But her mother had never asked safe while who else dies, Mama? Ava whispered into the dirt, and her voice broke completely. "Mama, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But they're going to die. They're all going to die, and I can stop it, and I can't keep this promise. Not this one, not today. Forgive me. Please forgive me." And Ava Carter, daughter of the ghost, made the decision that would destroy the only identity she had ever allowed herself and reached for her father's world. She moved. She came up out of the dirt low and fast, and she crossed the open ground toward the downed sniper, through fire that should have killed her, and it didn't because some part of her already knew where the rounds would go before the shooter sent them. She read the rhythm of their fire, the pauses, the reloads, the microseconds, when a man on the ridge shifted his aim, and she moved through the gaps in it like water through rocks. She slid in beside the wounded SEAL. His name tape said Okafor. His eyes found hers, and there was something in them that looked almost like relief. "You're her," he breathed. "The intel girl. You said it was a trap." "Don't talk," Ava said, her hands already moving to his wound, packing it fast and sure medical training, surfacing alongside everything else. "Stay with me, Okafor. Take the rifle." Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "I can't feel my legs. I can't shoot. But you. I saw your eyes. I saw the way you take the rifle. Take it. That's an order. Do you hear me? Take the—" "I hear you," Ava said, and she picked up the rifle. The moment her hands closed around it, everything changed. It was not like learning. It was like remembering. It was like a language she had been forbidden to speak her whole life suddenly pouring out of her, fluent, complete, as if it had been waiting behind a locked door for 11 years for someone to finally turn the key. Her hands found the grip in the forend and settled the stock into the pocket of her shoulder, and it was not the first time. It could never have been the first time. It felt like the 10,000th time. It felt like coming home to a house she had never lived in, but had somehow always known. And she felt the rifle, and she read the engraving on the receiver without needing to look because Okafor had said his name was Okafor, but this was not Okafor's rifle. This was a legacy weapon, a memorial piece passed down through the teams, and the name cut into the steel was a name Ava Carter had been running from her entire life. D. Carter, the ghost, her father's rifle. Somehow across 11 years and half the world, the rifle her father had carried had ended up in the hands of the teams, passed from operator to operator as an honor, and it had come to rest at Forward Operating Base Liberty, and it had ridden out into the Acheron Valley in the hands of a young SEAL named Okafor, and now it was in her hands in the exact place, in the exact moment when the only person alive who could truly use it was his daughter. Ava stared at the name, and the whole world went silent. "Dad," she whispered. And Daniel Carter's voice, the voice that had crouched beside her in the tall grass when she was 5 years old, filled her completely calm and steady and unafraid. "What do you see, Ava? Not what you're looking at. What do you see?" She raised the rifle. She pressed her cheek to the stock. She looked through the scope at the northern ridge, and for the first time in 11 years, she stopped fighting the eye, and she let it open all the way. And what she saw was a solution. 0652. The aggressive shooter first, 290 meters low on the scree, exposing too much of himself, a man who thought no one down here could touch him. She found him in the glass. She read the wind off the dust, in the grass, a gentle left to right, nothing she needed to fight. She settled her breathing, the breathing her father had taught her in for 4 hold, out for 4, and at the bottom of the exhale, in the still point between heartbeats. In the place her father called the quiet, she pressed the trigger. The rifle spoke. 290 meters away, the aggressive shooter stopped being a problem. Ava did not feel triumph. She did not feel horror. She felt the thing her father had described only once late at night when she was 12, and had asked him what it was like. She felt the quiet, the terrible total quiet of a mind that has narrowed to a single point and a single purpose, where there is no fear and no doubt and no promise to a dying mother, only the wind and the distance and the steady hands in the shot. "Contact," she said, and her voice was the calmest thing in the valley. "One down." Diaz, 20 feet away, had watched the whole thing and his jaw was on the ground. "Who?" he said. "Who fired that? Was that Carter? Was that you?" Ava was already shifting. The patient one now. The good shooter in the dead pine 410 meters, the one taking his time. He had seen his aggressive friend go down and he was scanning the valley floor, confused, looking for a shooter that couldn't be there because everyone knew the Americans down there were pinned and blind and dying. He was looking for a muzzle flash on the road. He was not looking at the relay position because the relay position was support staff, nobody was a mail slot with a haircut. His last mistake. Ava read the range, read the wind, which pushed harder at 400 meters, held for it, breathed, found the quiet, and fired. 410 meters away, the patient shooter's patience ended forever. "Two down," Ava said. Up the road, Ryan Kane heard the shots. At first, he didn't understand them. They came from behind him, from down the valley, from the direction of the relay position, where he'd left a wounded man and a coward communications specialist to babysit a radio. And they were not the sound of the enemy's fire. They were single-spaced, deliberate, precision shots. And after each one, a muzzle on the ridge went silent. "What the hell is that?" he said. "Who's shooting Reyes? Is that our overwatch? Is Okafor up?" "Okafor's down," Reyes shouted back through gritted teeth, still bleeding, still alive. "I saw him go down in the first volley. That can't be Okafor." Kane risked a look over the engine block, back down the valley toward the relay, and he saw something that made no sense at all. He saw a single figure low in the dead ground, working a bolt gun with a rhythm he had seen maybe twice in his entire career, the rhythm of a truly elite sniper fire cycle find fire. And every single time that rifle spoke, a shooter on the ridge stopped shooting. And the figure was small, and the figure had come off the relay position. And Kane's mind refused, absolutely refused to complete the thought, because the thought was insane. "That's not possible," he said. 0654. Ava found the third shooter on the northern ridge, the far one she'd clocked at the very start, the one at the rock outcrop. He had gone, still gone smart, pulled back into cover the moment his two friends dropped, because he was the leader up there, or close to it. And he understood now that something had gone very wrong, that the pinned and blind Americans had produced a rifle out of nowhere, and it was eating his team. He was hidden. Ava could see maybe a hand's width of him, and elbow the edge of a shoulder 390 meters out behind rock. Her father's voice. "You don't wait for a better target when men are dying, Ava. You take the shot you have. Trust the eye. Trust the hands. Send it." She sent it. The round found the hand's width of shoulder at 390 meters, and the leader of the northern ridge went down behind his rock and did not come back up. "Three down," Ava said. "Yes, and by northern ridge is quiet." She was already moving her attention to the southern ridge, already reading the two shooters. They're already laying the grid, and the calm in her was so complete, so total, that she had almost forgotten to be afraid of it. Had almost forgotten the promise, had almost forgotten everything except the wind and the distance and the men she was saving, one trigger pull at a time. And that was when Ryan Kane, half a kilometer up a road, slick with his own men's blood, finally let his mind finish the impossible thought. He grabbed the operator next to him and pointed down the valley with a shaking hand. "That's Carter," he said, and his voice was hollow, wrecked, transformed. "That's the communications specialist. That's the girl I called a mail slot. That's, oh my God, she's clearing the ridge. She's clearing the whole ridge by herself." The operator stared. "The support girl. That's not, sir, that's not possible. Support staff can't." "I know what I'm looking at," Kane said, and something in him was breaking and remaking itself all at once. "I know exactly what I'm looking at. I've just never seen it come from where I told it it wasn't allowed to exist." Down at the relay, Ava shifted to the southern ridge, and the two shooters there had figured out where the death was coming from. They turned their rifles on her. The first round cracked past her head close enough that she felt the wind of it. The second hit Okafor's cover and sprayed her with grit. They had her ranged now or close to it, and there were two of them and one of her. And this was the moment her father had told her about this moment too. The moment when the hunter becomes the hunted, and everything comes down to whether your hands stay steady when the rounds start coming back. "Carter, they've got you ranged," Daz screamed. "Move, you have to move." But Ava didn't move, because moving meant losing the shot, and losing the shot meant those two men on the southern ridge would go back to killing the convoy, and she had not broken the only promise that ever mattered to her, had not shattered her whole self to flinch now. Her father's voice one more time from the tall grass, from the kitchen table, from the deathless place where the people we love keep speaking to us. "Steady hands, Ava. The world can be ending. Your hands are always steady." The rounds were coming in. Diaz was screaming. Up the road, men were dying, and the clock on air support still read past 40 minutes, and everything in the universe was chaos and noise and fear. And Ava Carter went perfectly, completely still. She put the reticle on the nearest of the two southern shooters. She read the wind. She breathed in for 4. She held. She let the world end all around her, and she found at the bottom of her breath, in the still point between two heartbeats, the quiet. Her finger began to take up the slack on the trigger. She sent it, and the near shooter on the southern ridge died at 430 meters with his own finger still on his trigger. 4 down, Ava said, and she was already cycling the bolt, already sliding her aim to the last of the pair. The one who had watched his partner's head snap back and now understood in a rush of animal panic that he was alone on that ridge with a ghost. 0656. He broke. That was his mistake. Ava's father had taught her this at the kitchen table when she was 10, tracing lines on a map with a pencil. A man who holds his position is hard. A man who runs is easy. The moment fear takes his legs, it takes his life, because a running man moves in a straight line, and a straight line is the simplest math in the world. The last southern shooter came up out of his hide and ran for the reverse slope, and Ava led him the way you lead a bird, smooth and unhurried, and at 450 meters, she pressed the trigger at the exact instant her father's voice said now, and the running man's straight line ended. 5 down, Ava said. Southern ridge is quiet. For one heartbeat, the valley held its breath. Diaz was staring at her like she had descended from the sky. Blood still ran down his cheek, and he had forgotten it entirely. 5, he whispered. That was 5, Carter. That was 5 shooters. Who are you? Ava didn't answer. She couldn't, because the eye was still open, still counting, and it told her something that turned the small, warm flicker of hope in her chest back to ice. 5 down. She had said in the briefing tent that a proper ambush of this ground would take 10. She had felt more up there at the start than she could see, and now the 2 ridges she had cleared had gone silent, but the far end of the valley up past the convoy, up where the road bent toward the outpost, had not. There was more fire up there, heavier, coordinated. A second element dug in at the far cap of the valley, and they had the convoy pinned from the front, while the ridge shooters had worked it from the sides. She had broken the sides, but the front was still killing her people. "It's not over," she said. "Diaz, it's not over. There's a blocking force at the north end. That's where the convoy's really trapped. The ridges were the hammer. That's the anvil." "How can you possibly know that, Mama?" "Because it's how I would have done it," Ava said, and the words came out of her before she could stop them, and they were the truest and most terrible things she had said in 11 years. "Because it's how I would have done it." She was thinking like the men on that ridge. She had always been able to think like them. That was the whole horror her mother had seen and tried to save her from. She pushed the thought down. Later. She could hate herself later. Right now, there were men dying at the anvil. She keyed her sidearm radio, the short-range one, the only thing still transmitting. "Any station this net, this is Carter at relay. Ridge shooters neutralized north and south. Convoy security element, report your status over." Static. Then Kane's voice, and it was a voice Ava had never heard from him, stripped of every ounce of the contempt he'd carried for 9 days, raw and cracking and almost afraid. "Carter." He paused, and she could hear him swallowing. "Carter, was that you? The ridge, the shooters going down, that was you?" "Affirmative," Ava said. "What's your status, Chief?" Another pause longer, and when he came back, his voice broke on the first word. "We've got wounded. We've got dead. Whitmore's gone. Reyes is hit bad. We're pinned by a heavy element at the North Cap. They've got a machine gun up there in the rocks. We can't move. We can't reach our casualties, and air is still 38 mics out. He stopped. She heard him breathe. Carter, whatever you just did, however you did it, I need you to do it again. I've got men dying up here, and I can't get to them, and I don't understand what's happening, but I am asking you, I am asking the girl I told to charge my batteries. Can you get to that machine gun? Ava closed her eyes for 1 second. 9 days of being called a mail slot with a haircut. 9 days of hauling his gear and cleaning up his messes and swallowing his cruelty. And now Ryan Cain was on the radio begging her, the coward support girl, to save his life and the lives of his men because she was the only one on this battlefield who could. She could have hated him for it. Part of her wanted to. But her father's voice was there instead, quiet and certain. You don't take the shot for the men who respect you, Ava. You take it for the men who need you. That's the difference between a killer and a protector. Never forget which one you are. I'm coming, Ava said, but I can't do it from here. I can't see the north cap from the relay. I need to move up the eastern draw, get on the flank of that machine gun. It's going to take me time, and it's going to put me in the open. Chief, when I move, I need every gun you've got to make noise. I need the enemy watching you, not the draw. Can you do that? We can do that, Cain said instantly. You tell me when. Ava looked at Okafor. His eyes were still open, but they were getting glassy, the light in them starting to slide towards somewhere far away. Stay alive, she told him. You gave me the rifle. Now you stay alive to see what I do with it. That's an order, Okafor, from me, the intel girl. Okafor's cracked lips pulled into something that was almost a smile. Yes, ma'am. Diaz. She turned to the young operator. Okafor's wound is packed, but he's going into shock. You keep pressure on it, and you keep him talking, and you do not let him close his eyes. Can you do that? Yes, I've got him. Go, just Carter, go. Ava took her father's rifle, and she took the spare magazines from Okafor's kit, and she rose up out of the dead ground, and she began to move up the eastern draw toward the machine gun that was killing her people. 0658. Half a kilometer away, Ryan Cain watched her go. Watched a small figure detach itself from the relay position and flow up the broken ground on the eastern edge of the valley with a speed and a smoothness that made his chest hurt, and he turned to his surviving men. 6 of them bloodied and pinned and out of hope, and he said something he never in his life imagined he would say. You see that soldier moving up the draw? His voice shook. That soldier is worth 10 of us right now. On my mark, everybody puts rounds on that north cap. I don't care if you hit anything. I care that every enemy up there is looking at us and not at her. We are going to be the loudest, dumbest, most obvious target in the history of this war, and we are going to buy that soldier the seconds she needs. Do you understand me? Sir, one of them said. Who is that? Cain was quiet for a moment. That's Specialist Ava Carter, he said. And I owe her an apology I don't think I'll ever be able to pay. Now get ready. On my mark. In the eastern draw, Ava climbed. The eye guided her every step. It found the folds in the ground where she'd be hidden. The moments of exposure, she'd have to sprint through the natural line that would take her up onto the flank of the machine gun position without silhouetting her against the sky. She moved the way her father had moved, the way the ghost had moved, invisible until the moment he wasn't. And as she climbed, something was happening inside her that frightened her almost as much as the machine gun. She was starting to feel alive, not happy, not proud, alive. For 11 years, she had lived at half volume, made herself small and quiet and dim, and now climbing a draw with her father's rifle in her hands and her father's voice in her ears, doing the one thing she had sworn never to do. She felt every nerve in her body singing, felt more purely and completely herself than she had felt since she was a child on the ridge behind her house. And she understood with a grief so sharp it nearly stopped her exactly what her mother had been afraid of. Her mother hadn't been afraid Ava would die. Her mother had been afraid Ava would love it. I'm not him, Ava whispered to herself as she climbed. I'm not. I'm doing this to save them. That's all. That's all this is. But the eye was open and the hands were steady, and the quiet was waiting for her at the top of the draw, and some part of her, the part she had spent her whole life pretending not to have, knew that it was not quite all. She reached the flank of the north cap at 0700. She came up slow behind a shelf of rock, and she looked, and there it was. The heavy machine gun dug into a natural notch in the rocks, two men on it, one firing, one feeding the belt, raking the pinned convoy with a steady murderous rhythm. And behind them, spread through the cap, she counted the rest of the enemy element, and her stomach dropped. 5 more. 2 on the gun, 5 in support. 7 men. She had killed 5 on the ridges. 5 and 7 was 12, not 10. Her estimate in the briefing had been wrong. There were more of them than she thought. And she was one woman with a bolt-action rifle and a sidearm on the flank of a 7-man element with a belt-fed machine gun, and the moment she started shooting 6 of them were going to know exactly where she was and turn everything they had on a single position with no support and no backup and no way out. Ava lay behind the rock shelf and did the math, and the math was very bad. Her father's voice. When the math is bad, Ava, you change the math. You don't fight the fight in front of you. You fight the fight, you can win. What can you take away from them? She looked at the gun. She looked at the ammunition. She looked at the belt feeding into the machine gun and the ammunition cans stacked beside it. And she looked at the way the whole enemy element had oriented itself, every man facing down valley toward the convoy, every eye on Kane, because Kane had just opened up with everything he had, 6 guns hammering. The North Cap, drawing every ounce of the enemy's attention exactly as she'd asked, buying her these seconds with their own lives. Change the math. She keyed her radio, barely a whisper. Chief, I'm in position. Flank of the North Cap. 7 of them, not what I thought. I need one more thing from you. When I fire the first shot, I need you to charge. Say again, Kane's voice incredulous. Charge Carter, they'll cut us too. They won't, Ava said, because after my first shot, they're going to be looking at me. I'm going to take the gunner. When that gun goes silent and they all turn to find me, that's your window. That's the only window you'll get. You charge that cap and you finish what I start, or we both fail and everyone dies. Do you trust me? There was a silence that lasted 100 years. 9 days ago, I told you that you were nobody, Kane said. I have never been more wrong about anything in my life. Yeah, Carter, I trust you. Take your shot. We'll be right behind you. Ava settled behind her father's rifle. She put the reticle on the machine gunner, the man whose hands were killing her people, the center of the whole enemy's power 40 meters away, a distance so short after the ridge shots that it felt like reaching out and touching him. She breathed in for 4. She held. 0701. This is for the men on that road, she whispered. And Dad, this is for you, wherever you are. Watch your girl. She found the quiet. She pressed the trigger. The machine gunner died, and the gun went silent, and in the sudden, shocking absence of its roar, every man on the North Cap froze and then whipped around toward the flank where the single shot had come from, exactly as she'd known they would. And for one perfect suspended instant, 7 enemy fighters, 6 now, were looking the wrong way, were off balance, were confused, were vulnerable. And Ava Carter went to work. She cycled the bolt and took the loader, the second man on the gun, before he could get his hands on it, 6 now, 5. She was already moving as she fired, sliding along the rock shelf to a new position, because staying put after your first shot was how you died. Her father had drilled that into her before she could ride a bicycle. Move after every shot. A stationary sniper is a dead sniper. Move, shoot, move. The remaining 5 were bringing their rifles around, searching for her, and one of them found her old position and hammered it with fire a full second after she'd left it, and she rose up from her new position 8 meters to the left and took him at 30 meters, 5-4. And then Kane hit them. He came over the lip of the North Cap with his 6 men, and every weapon blazing, screaming a wall of vengeance and firepower crashing into an enemy element that had turned his back on the valley to hunt a single sniper on its flank, and the enemy caught between Ava's rifle and Kane's charge between the ghosts picking them off from the rocks and the SEALs coming up the front, broke completely. It was over in 90 seconds. 0703. When the shooting stopped, the North Cap belonged to the Americans, and the 7 men who had held it were dead, and the machine gun sat silent in its notch with its dead crew beside it, and Ryan Kane stood in the middle of it all with his chest heaving and his weapon still up and turned in a slow circle, looking for a threat and finding none. And then he lowered his rifle and turned toward the rock shelf on the flank, where a small figure was rising slowly to her feet with a bolt-action rifle in her hands. The two of them looked at each other across the corpses of the men who had tried to kill them both. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. There was nothing in the world big enough to say. Then Cain walked toward her slow, and he stopped a few feet away, and Ava saw that his hands were shaking, this hard, cruel, confident man, and there were tracks through the dirt on his face that had not come from sweat. 12, he said. His voice was barely there. You said 10 in the briefing. There were 12. And you took, how many did you take? Ava's eye had counted without asking. 7 on the ridges in the flank. You and your men took the rest. 7? Cain laughed a broken, disbelieving sound and dragged his sleeve across his face. 7 confirmed, solo, with a bolt gun. Out in 15 minutes, 20. He shook his head slowly. I have been doing this my whole adult life. I have served with the best shooters this country has ever produced. And I have never, not once, seen anything like what you just did. He stared at her. Where did you learn that? Who taught you to shoot like that? Ava looked down at the rifle in her hands, at the name cut into the steel of the receiver catching the light. D. Carter, the ghost. And 11 years of silence, 11 years of being nobody, 11 years of a promise she had just shattered on the floor of a valley in a country whose name would never make the news finally reach their end. My father, Ava said quietly, my father taught me. Cain's eyes dropped to the rifle, to the name. She watched him read it. She watched the recognition move across his face because every SEAL knew that name. That name was legend. That name was carved into a memorial wall back home. And she watched him understand who she was and what she was and exactly how badly he had misjudged the quiet woman he had spent 9 days grinding under his boot. Carter, he breathed. The ghost. Daniel Carter. You're his. His daughter, Ava said. And behind them, unnoticed in the chaos and the aftermath, a lone figure came up over the lip of the North Cap. An older man with gray at his temples who had commandeered a vehicle the moment the first contact report came in and driven straight into a valley. He had no orders to enter because he had known. He had known since the briefing tent, and he could not sit in a guard tower 1 second longer. Master Chief Donovan Hayes stood at the edge of the carnage and looked at Ava Carter standing there with her father's rifle in her hands and his weathered face crumpled, and one hand rose to press against his chest against the jacket pocket where a soft old envelope with a single word written on it had ridden for 11 years. Daniel, he whispered to no one to a rooftop half a world and 11 years away. Daniel, you were right. You were right about all of it. She's here, and God help us, she's better than you were. He started walking toward her, and Ava, feeling eyes on her, turned and saw the old Master Chief coming across the North Cap toward her with something in his face she couldn't read, and something in his hand that she couldn't yet see, and every instinct she owned went suddenly completely still. Hayes stopped 3 feet from her, and for a long moment, the old Master Chief just looked at Ava Carter, and she looked back, and neither of them said a word. Then his eyes went to the rifle in her hands, to the name on the receiver, and his whole face broke open. Put it down easy, Carter, he said, his voice rough. You've been holding it a long time, longer than you know. Master Chief, Ava said. Her hands did not shake, but something in her chest had started to. You know this rifle. I carried the man who carried it, Hayes said, for 6 years on 4 continents. I was standing 30 feet from your father the day he taught a whole team of hard-headed operators that the quietest man in the room is the one you should be watching. He swallowed. And I was standing on the rooftop the day we lost him. The world tilted under Ava's feet. 07. 06. Around them, the North Cap was chaos and aftermath. Men calling casualties, the distant beat of the inbound medevac finally growing louder. Cain organizing his shattered element with a voice gone hoarse. But for Ava, all of it fell away because this old man with gray at his temples had just said the thing no one had said to her in 11 years. He had said her father's name like he loved him. You were there, she whispered. When he died, you were there. I was there. Hayes's jaw worked, and I have carried something for you ever since. Something he gave me. Something I swore I wouldn't hand over until the day came. He reached into his jacket slow so she could see his hands the way you move when you're near someone holding a rifle. Carter, the day came. It came about 20 minutes ago when you cleared 2 ridges and a machine gun nest with your father's rifle and saved every man in this valley. He drew out the envelope. Soft with age. A single word on the front in a hard slanting hand she would have known anywhere because it was the same hand that had written her name inside the front cover of every field manual he'd ever left her as a child. Ava, her father's handwriting. Her legs almost went out from under her. He wrote this. Her voice came out as barely anything. When, 11 years ago, on a rooftop, the night before we lost him, Hayes held it out. He knew Ava. Somehow he knew. He put this in my hand, and he told me if you ever meet a woman who reads the high ground like she was born on it, and she's got my name, and she's pretending she can't do what she can do, you find a way to be near her, because it means the war finally reached her too. His voice cracked completely on the last words. That's why I transferred to this base. That's why I've been watching you for 9 days. Because the second you walked across that yard and lifted your eyes to the ridge without even knowing you'd done it, I knew. You're his. You've always been his. Ava took the envelope in a hand that was for the first time in her entire life not steady. She looked at her name in her father's handwriting, and 11 years of a wall she had built, brick by careful brick, began all at once to come down. I made a promise, she said, and the words tore out of her, to my mother on her deathbed. I promised her I would never touch a rifle. I promised her I would never become him. I promised her I would be nobody, so I'd be safe, so she wouldn't have to be a mother who buried her daughter like she was a wife who buried her husband. She was shaking now openly, the calm cracked wide. I kept it for 11 years, Master Chief. 11 years. And I broke it today. I broke it in the dirt down there with men screaming and dying, and I picked up his rifle, and I broke the only promise that ever mattered. Hayes stepped closer. He put a weathered hand on her shoulder, and it was gentle, and it was steadying, and it was the hand of a man who had comforted a great many soldiers over a great many terrible days. Ava, he said, listen to me. Listen to an old man who knew your father better than almost anyone alive. He waited until her eyes came up to his. Your mother made you promise you'd never become your father, and I need you to hear me when I tell you this. You didn't. I killed 7 men today. You saved 11, and Hayes said, that's the difference. That's the whole difference, and it's everything. His grip tightened on her shoulder. Your father was a hunter. God rest him, I loved him. But that's what he was. He went out to find men and end them, and he was the best there ever was at it, and it hollowed him out a piece at a time until there wasn't much left but the eye and the hands and the quiet. Your mother watched that happen. She married a whole man and buried a half a one, and she was terrified that the same thing would happen to you. He shook his head slowly. But you're not a hunter, Ava. I watched you today. You didn't go up that draw to kill anybody. You went up that draw to keep Ryan Kane's men from dying. Every single round you fired to protect. You broke the letter of your mother's promise, but you kept the spirit of it more completely than she ever dreamed. You didn't become the thing that hollowed your father out. You became the thing he always wished he could be. Ava stared at him, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on her face, and she did not know if she believed him, but she wanted to, God, she wanted to, more than she had wanted anything in 11 years. Open the letter, Hayes said softly. He'll tell you himself. He was always better with the truth than I am. 0709. Ava turned the soft old envelope over in her trembling hands. She broke the seal her father had pressed closed 11 years ago on a rooftop the night before he died. She drew out a single folded page worn thin at the creases from a decade in a footlocker, and she opened it and she saw his handwriting to fill the page, and she began to read. Ava did not open the envelope right away. She stood there with it in her hands, her father's handwriting staring up at her, and she found that she could not make her fingers move. 11 years. For 11 years she had built a wall between herself and this exact moment, and now the wall was rubble at her feet, and behind it was not the monster she'd feared but a single folded page, and somehow that was worse. A monster she could have fought. This she did not know how to survive. I can't, she said. Her voice was very small. Master Chief, I can't open it. Not yet. If I open it and if his voice is in there, I don't think I'll be able to stand up again. Hayes nodded slowly. He didn't push her. He'd buried enough men to know that grief keeps its own clock. Then hold it, he said. It's waited 11 years. It'll wait 11 more minutes. He looked out over the valley at the smoke and the stillness. Can I tell you something about your father while you find your feet? Please, Ava whispered. Nobody's talked to me about him in 11 years. My mother couldn't. And after she was gone, there was no one left who knew him. 07707. Hayes lowered himself down onto a shelf of rock, slow the way older men sit, and Ava sank down beside him with the rifle across her knees and the letter in her fist. And for a moment they were not two soldiers on a battlefield. They were just two people who had loved the same dead man. There was a village, Hayes said. Doesn't matter where, bad place, bad year. We were pulling out a family that had helped us, and it went wrong the way these things go wrong, and we ended up pinned in a compound with the family in the middle and no way out. He rubbed his hands together. Your father was on overwatch, 200 meters out on a roof alone like always. And there was a little girl in that compound, maybe 6, same age you were when he started taking you up the ridge. He told me that later. And a fighter got inside the wire and he had that little girl by the arm. And he was using her, you understand, using her as a shield to advance on our position. And there was no shot. There was no shot, Ava, not one that any human being should have been able to make. The girl was moving, the light was bad, and the margin between saving her and killing her was about 2 inches. Ava had gone very still. She knew this feeling. She had lived inside it 40 minutes ago on the flank of the North Cap. What did he do? She said. He took it. Hayes's voice was rough. He took the 2-inch shot at 200 meters on a moving target with a child's life in the balance. And he made it, and that little girl walked out of that compound and grew up somewhere and probably has children of her own now who will never know that a man they never heard of chose to risk everything so their mother could live. He turned and looked at her. And you know what he said to me that night? He didn't say he was a hero. He didn't say anything about the shot. He said, Donovan, I'm so tired of being the one who has to decide. That's what the gift cost him. Not the killing, the deciding. Every single day being the one who has to decide who lives. Ava's throat closed. That's why my mother was afraid. That's why your mother was afraid, Hayes agreed. She watched him carry that weight home, a little more of it every time, until some nights he'd just sit at the kitchen table in the dark and she couldn't reach him. She didn't want that for you, and I understand it. God, I understand it. He put his weathered hand over hers over the letter. But here's what she never got to see, Ava, what I saw today. When you took that machine gunner at 40 meters, and then you moved, and you took the loader, and you kept moving, and you didn't hesitate, not once you weren't tired. You weren't hollowed out. You were the most alive thing in this valley. Because you weren't deciding who dies. You were deciding who lives. And that's a different weight entirely. That one you can carry your whole life and never break. 0710. The words landed somewhere deep in Ava, somewhere the promise had lived for 11 years, and she felt the ground of her whole identity shift under her. You keep saying that, she said, deciding who lives, like it's a different thing. It is a different thing. It's the only thing. Hayes squeezed her hand. Your father was a hunter who wished he was a shield. You're the shield he wished he was. That letter in your hand is going to tell you the same thing in his words, because I heard him say it 100 times, and I know exactly what a man writes to a daughter he's afraid he'll never see grow up. He let go of her hand. Open it when you're ready. Not before, but know that whatever's in there, it isn't a curse. It's a blessing that took 11 years to reach you. And Ava at last moved her fingers. But before she could break a seal, a voice cut across the valley, hoarse and urgent, and it froze her hand where it was. Carter. It was Diaz running up from the relay position, and his face was wrong, twisted with something that wasn't fear of the enemy, but something closer to horror. The specific horror of a young man who has just learned something he wishes he hadn't. Carter, you gotta come. It's Reyes. He's saying something. He keeps saying something, and I don't understand it, but he says he has to tell you. Before the bird comes back, he says it's about the mission, about how they knew Carter. He says he knows how they knew our route. 0711. Ava was on her feet before Diaz finished the sentence, the letter shoved into her breast pocket, unopened the rifle coming up into her hands, and she was already moving down toward the relay, with Hayes and Diaz scrambling behind her. Corporal Reyes was propped against the wheel of the shattered lead vehicle, a tourniquet high on his thigh, gray-faced but conscious, fighting to stay that way. When he saw Ava, his eyes locked onto her with a desperate intensity. You, he rasped, the intel girl, you said, in the briefing, you said 3 weeks of quiet was a setup and you were right and everybody laughed. He grabbed her sleeve with a bloody hand. But it's worse. It's worse than a setup, Carter. They didn't just guess our route, they knew it. Exact. The timing, the vehicles, everything. Somebody told them. The valley went cold around Ava. Reyes, she said, kneeling, keeping her voice level, keeping him focused. What are you saying to me? Say it clearly. 2 days ago, he was fighting the shock, fighting to get it out. I was on comms overnight. Boyle's shift, but he was sick, so I covered. And there was a transmission, encrypted but on a channel that shouldn't have been active, going out, not coming in. Somebody on this base sent something out 2 nights before this mission on a route the enemy shouldn't have had. I logged it. I flagged it. I gave it to... He stopped. His eyes went wide with a fresh horror. I gave it to the officer who assigned the relay position. I gave it to the man who put you in the middle of the kill zone, Carter. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was reporting a leak up the chain, but what if I reported the leak to the leak? 0712. Ava's blood turned to ice. She thought about the relay position, the one in the exact center of the throat, the one that made no tactical sense, that Boyle himself had been uneasy about, but couldn't override because it came down as a tasking from above. She had assumed it was carelessness. Command sending support staff into a kill zone because they hadn't taken her warning seriously. But what if it hadn't been carelessness? What if someone had put her there on purpose, not to kill her specifically? She was nobody. But to have a warm body at the relay so the position would look legitimate, so the convoy would trust its comms and drive down the throat with its guard fully down, right into a trap that someone on the inside had helped set. Who? Ava said very quietly, very steadily, and every man within earshot went silent at the sound of that voice. Reyes, who did you give the flag transmission to? Say the name. Reyes's mouth worked. His eyes were sliding, the shock pulling him under. Reyes. Ava took his face in her hands. Stay with me. One name. Give me one name and then you can rest. Who assigned the relay position? Reyes's lips moved. The name came out on a thread of breath, barely audible, but in the dead silence of the valley, every man heard it, and Ava heard it, and she felt the entire shape of the day rearrange itself one final terrible time. She would not repeat that name here. Not yet. Because a name spoken over a battlefield to a dying man is not proof, and Daniel Carter's daughter had been taught by the best man who ever carried a rifle that you never ever take the shot until you are certain of the target. But she filed it away cold and precise in the part of her that never forgot anything. Rest now, Reyes, she said, gently easing him back against the wheel. You did the right thing. You reported it. Whatever went wrong after that isn't on you. You hear me? It's not on you. The bird's coming back and you're going home, and you're going to testify to exactly what you just told me in front of people who can do something about it. That's an order. You survived to tell it. Yes, ma'am. Reyes breathed and his eyes fluttered closed, but his chest kept rising and falling, and that was enough. Ava stood. Hayes was staring at her, and he had heard the name too, and his weathered face had gone hard as stone. You heard him, Ava said. I heard him. Do you believe it? Hayes was quiet for a long moment. I believe that a convoy that shouldn't have been ambushed got ambushed with perfect intelligence, he said. I believe a relay position that made no tactical sense put a warm body exactly where the enemy needed one. And I believe that in 18 years of watching men, I have learned that the ones who talk loudest about being the tip of the spear are sometimes the ones with the most to hide. He met her eyes. But belief isn't proof, Ava. And the man he named has friends and rank and a spotless record, and you are a communications specialist that half this command didn't know existed until an hour ago. I know, Ava said. If you go up the chain with this and you're wrong, they'll bury you. And if you're right, whoever did this will make sure you're the one who takes the fall for it, because it's your word against the decorated officers, and you're the one who was conveniently at the center of the whole thing. I know that too, Ava said. 0714. And here was the strange thing, the thing that told her more clearly than anything else that she had truly changed in the last hour, that the woman who had walked into this valley was not the woman standing in it now. She was not afraid. The old Ava, the nobody, would have swallowed it, would have decided it wasn't her place, wasn't her fight, that a support specialist doesn't accuse an officer, that the safe thing, the invisible thing, was to log what Reyes said and let it disappear the way inconvenient truths disappear. Be nobody. Be safe. Be nobody. But that Ava was gone. She'd left her in the dirt at the bottom of the kill zone the moment she picked up her father's rifle. Men died in this valley because someone sold them, Ava said, and her voice was the quiet level, absolutely certain voice of a woman who had finally stopped pretending to be small. Whitmore died. Reyes almost died. Okafor might still die. And whoever did it is going to be standing on that base when we get back wearing a clean uniform, ready to write a report that makes all of it look like bad luck. She looked at Hayes. You said my father spent his whole life being the one who had to decide. Well, I'm deciding. I'm not going to be nobody about this. I'm not going to be safe. I'm going to find out who did it, and I'm going to prove it, and I'm going to make sure every man who died in this valley gets the truth. Hayes looked at her for a long, long moment, and then slowly the old Master Chief did something he had done for exactly one other person in his entire life on a rooftop half a world away 11 years ago. He came to attention and he saluted her. Then you'll need help, he said, and you've got mine all the way, whatever it costs. Behind them, Kane had come up quiet, and he had heard the last of it, and his jaw was set. Mine too, he said. I put men in that valley on a tasking I never questioned. If somebody engineered that, if Whitmore's blood is on an inside job, then I don't care whose friend he is or how many medals he's got. You point me at him, Carter, and I'm there. He paused. I owe you that. I owe Whitmore that. 0716. Ava looked at the two of them, the old legend's oldest friend and the man who 9 days ago had called her a mail slot with a haircut, standing shoulder to shoulder, offering to follow her into a fight against their own chain of command. Something in her chest, something that had been clenched tight for 11 years, finally fully let go. She was not nobody. She had never been nobody. She had been a shield the whole time, waiting for the day someone would need her badly enough that she'd have no choice but to become what she was born to be. The day had come, and it wasn't over. All right, she said. Then here's what we do. We say nothing on the open net, nothing that names anyone, nothing that tips our hand. As far as the record shows, the ambush was enemy intelligence, and Reyes is delirious from shock. We get everyone home. We get Okafor and Reyes to a hospital and alive because Reyes is the only witness to that transmission, and I am not letting him die or disappear before he can testify. She was moving now, thinking 3 steps ahead, the eye that read terrain reading the shape of a conspiracy just as easily. Then I find that flagged transmission log. Reyes said he logged it. If it's still in the system, it's proof somebody sent traffic they shouldn't have. And whoever assigned the relay left a paper trail because taskings always leave a trail. I find the log, I match it to the tasking, and I hand the whole thing to Commander Mitchell, who I do not believe is part of this. Because a man who's part of it doesn't get on the net and demand to know who cleared the valley. And if the log's been deleted, Hayes asked. Ava almost smiled. Master Chief, I'm a communications specialist. I've spent 11 years being the best in every comm shop I've ever worked in, precisely because being invisible meant being twice as good, so nobody had a reason to look at me twice. The corner of her mouth turned up grim and certain. There is no such thing as a deleted transmission. There's only a transmission that a lazy man thinks he deleted. If it was ever on this network, I will find it. 0718. The medevacs rotors thundered back over the ridgeline inbound for the second lift, and the moment for talk was over. Ava turned back into the storm of it. She got Reyes loaded, gripping his hand, telling him one more time to survive to testify. She got the last of the wounded aboard. She stood in the rotor wash with her father's rifle slung across her back, now no longer hidden, no longer denied, and she directed the evacuation of the men she had saved with a calm that made the flight medics stare. And when the bird lifted off with its cargo of the living, banking away over the ridge, she had cleared shot by shot. Ava Carter finally reached into her breast pocket and drew out her father's letter. And she stood alone in the settling dust of the Ashuran Valley, and she opened it. My Ava. If Donovan is giving you this, then the day I always dreaded and always knew would come has finally come. The war has reached you, and you've done the thing your mother and I both prayed you'd never have to do. You've picked up the rifle. I need you to stop crying because I know you're crying, and I need you to hear your old man one more time. Ava's breath hitched. She could hear his voice in every line, low and steady, the voice from the tall grass, the voice from the kitchen table. Your mother made you promise never to become me. I know. I was in the next room. I heard her and I didn't stop her, and I've regretted it every day since because she asked you the wrong thing, sweetheart. She was afraid and fear asked the wrong questions. She should never have asked you to be nobody. Nobody is not safe. Nobody just dies quiet instead of loud. Here is what I would have asked you if I'd had the courage that day. I would have asked you to be somebody who only ever uses the eye to stand between the strong and the weak. To be somebody who picks up the rifle only when putting it down means someone innocent dies. I would have asked you to carry the gift the way it was meant to be carried, not as a hunter, but as a shield. The thing I never learned to be. The thing you already are and always were from the first day I watched you read The Wind in the Grass when you were 5 years old, and I knew, God help me, I knew you had it worse than I ever did. You are not my sin, Ava. You are my redemption. You are what I would have been if I'd been a better man. So put down the guilt. You didn't break your promise to your mother today. You finally understood it. Be safe, she said. And you were never going to be safe by being nobody. You were only ever going to be safe by being exactly who you are, all the way without shame, standing between the people who need you and the ones who'd hurt them. I'm proud of you. I was always proud of you. I'm sorry I wasn't there to say it out loud. Now wipe your face, soldier. There are men who need you. Go take care of them. Your father. Always. Ava's hands dropped to her sides, the letter clutched in her fingers, and she stood on the corpse-strewn crown of the North Cap and wept openly, silently, 11 years of grief and guilt and self-denial pouring out of her all at once. Hayes said nothing. He just stood beside her, a hand on her shoulder, and let the daughter of his oldest friend finally set down a weight she'd carried since she was 15. 0712. The medevac came in loud overhead, and the moment broke because there were men who needed her exactly as her father had said. Ava wiped her face with the back of her hand. She folded the letter and pushed it into her breast pocket over her heart, where she would carry it for the rest of her life. And she turned back into a soldier because down below Okafor was fighting for his life, and Reyes was bleeding, and Diaz was a scared kid keeping a dying man awake by the sheer force of his own terror. Master Chief, she said, and her voice had steadied again, but it was different now. Steady in a new way. Steady like something that had made peace with itself. We've got critical casualties at the relay and along the convoy. Okafor took a round through the abdomen. I packed it, but he's been in shock for 20 minutes. He gave me this rifle. He gave me my father's rifle when he thought he was dying, and he told me to use it, and I am not going to let him die. Then let's go get him, Hayes said. They went down off the North Cap together. The old Master Chief and the daughter of the Ghost and Ryan Kane fell in beside them without a word, and the three of them moved down the valley toward the wounded. And every man they passed, every bloodied, exhausted, disbelieving SEAL who had survived the Asheron Valley went quiet as Ava walked by, and then one by one, without anyone giving an order, they got to their feet. A man with a field dressing wrapped around his arm stood up. A man reloading a magazine stopped and stood up. A gunner behind a smoking barrel stood up. They stood for her, these elite operators who 9 days ago had laughed when a chief called her a mail slot with a haircut. And not one of them was laughing now. Ava didn't look at any of them. She had eyes only for the relay, for the small figure of Diaz waving frantically for the man on the ground beside him. She reached Okafor and dropped to her knees. His eyes were closed. No, she said. No, Okafor, open your eyes. That was an order. Open your eyes. Nothing. Okafor, she gripped his jaw. You gave me the Ghost rifle. You don't get to give me my father's rifle and then die on me. Do you understand? Open your eyes and see what you did. You want to know who you handed it to. You handed it to Daniel Carter's daughter. You put the Legend's rifle in the hands of the Legend's kid, and I cleared this whole valley with it because of you, because you saw something in me when I couldn't even see it in myself. So open your eyes, soldier, open them. Okafor's eyes fluttered. They opened. Told you, Tom, he rasped so faint she had to lean in to hear it. A ghost of a smile. Told you. Saw it in your eyes. Diaz made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. He's back. He's back. Oh, thank God. Medevac's inbound 30 seconds. Ava sat already up on her feet, already waving the helicopter down, already back in command of herself, in the situation, and the whole terrible, beautiful truth of who she was. Diaz, keep that pressure on. Okafor, you stay with me. We're getting you home. Chief Kane. Here, Kane said right at her shoulder. What do you need? The words landed strange between them. 9 days ago, he would sooner have died than ask her what she needed. Now he was asking it like his life depended on the answer, because in a way it had. I need a casualty count, and I need it triaged, Ava said. Most critical first. Get them ready to load the second that bird touches down. We are not losing one more person in this valley. Not one. Are we clear? Crystal, Kane said, and then as she turned to move, he caught her arm, just for a second. Carter. He looked at her and his face was a wreck of everything he'd been forced to unlearn in the last 20 minutes. I called you nobody. I called you a mail slot. I took your water and I made you carry my crates, and I laughed at you in front of the whole base for saying the exact thing that turned out to be true. The thing that would have saved Whitmore if I'd listened. His voice failed him. Whitmore's dead because I didn't listen to you. I have to live with that. I don't know how to say I'm... Then don't, Ava said. Not cruel, just clear. Don't say it now. Say it later if you still mean it, when there's no bird inbound and no blood on the ground. Right now, I don't need your apology, Chief. I need your hands. Get me that casualty count. Kane stared at her for one more second, and then something like the beginning of respect. Real respect, the kind that has to be earned in blood, settled into his eyes, and he nodded once and went to work. The medevac touched down. They loaded Okafor first, then Reyes, then the rest of the wounded, and Ava stood in the rotor wash directing all of it, and the pilots and the flight medics looked at this communications specialist running a mass casualty evacuation with the calm of a 20-year veteran, and had no idea what they were seeing, and no one had time to explain it. 0721. The last of the critical wounded lifted off. The valley began at last to quiet. And in the sudden relative stillness, Commander Mitchell's voice came over the net, because he had been listening to the whole thing unfold from the base, had heard the contact report, had heard the impossible stream of confirmed kills, had heard Kane of all people calling a communications specialist worth 10 of his men. All stations, this is actual, Mitchell said. I want a full report the moment you're back inside the wire, and I want to know one thing right now, because I've been listening to this net for 20 minutes and I don't believe what I'm hearing. A pause. Who neutralized those shooters? Give me a name. Who cleared the Asheron Valley? There was a silence on the net, and then Ryan Kane keyed his radio, and in front of his surviving team, in front of Hayes, in front of God and everyone listening, the man who had spent 9 days grinding Ava Carter into the dirt gave the answer. Actual, this is Kane. The shooters were neutralized by Specialist Ava Carter. Communications. 7 confirmed solo with a bolt-action rifle in under 20 minutes from 3 separate firing positions. His voice was steady and clear, and carried something Ava had never once heard in it. Pride. Sir, I've served 18 years. I have never seen shooting like it in my life. She called the ambush in the briefing hour yesterday, and I laughed at her. She was right about every single detail. If she hadn't picked up that rifle, there would be no one left in this valley to make a report. Recommend you have her whole file pulled and reviewed the second we're back, because there is no way in hell she belongs in a comms tent. A beat. That's my report, sir, on the record. The silence on the net stretched out. Then Mitchell's voice came back slow and stunned. Say again your last, Kane. You're telling me a communications specialist? I'm telling you Daniel Carter's daughter just saved my whole element, sir, Kane said. The ghost daughter. It's her father's rifle. She's been hiding in plain sight on your base for 9 days, and I was too stupid to see it, and I will put every word of that in writing. 0724. Ava stood in the settling dust of the valley, her father's rifle in her hands, her father's letter over her heart, and listened to Ryan Kane tell the base commander who she was. And she felt something she had not felt in 11 years, something she had been too afraid to even want. She felt seen, not exposed, not caught, seen. For the first time since a hospital room in a dying woman's hand, Ava Carter was standing in the full light of exactly who she was, and the world had not ended, and the people around her were not afraid of her. They were alive because of her, and her father's voice was in her ears saying, I'm proud of you. I was always proud of you, and it was almost too much to bear. Hayes came and stood beside her. He looked out over the valley, over the wreckage and the aftermath and the survivors, and he let out a long, slow breath. Your father used to say something, he told her quietly. He said the gift isn't a curse and it isn't a blessing. It just is. What matters is who's holding it and why. He turned to her. I've been waiting 11 years to find out what kind of person would end up holding Daniel Carter's rifle. A faint, weary, deeply moved smile. Now I know. And I think he'd be at peace, Ava. For the first time since I've known his memory, I think the ghost can finally rest. Ava couldn't answer. She didn't trust her voice. But she reached down and took the old Master Chief's hand and held it hard the way she'd held her mother's hand in that hospital room 11 years ago. And Hayes held it back, and the two of them stood together in the quiet where a battle had been. Then in the distance, a second sound began to grow. Not the medevac returning. Heavier. Multiple aircraft. The quick reaction forced the reinforcements, the whole weight of the base's response, finally arriving 43 minutes too late to fight, and just in time to witness. And as the helicopters flared in and disgorged fresh operators who fanned out across the valley expecting a battle, and finding only its ghosts expecting to rescue a pinned convoy, and finding instead a single communications specialist standing at the center of it all, with a legend's rifle in her hands. Ava Carter understood that the life she had built, the careful, quiet, invisible life of being nobody, was over. There was no putting this back in the box. Every man in this valley had seen it. It was already on the net. It was already in Kane's mouth and Mitchell's ears, and it would be in the official report by nightfall and up the chain by morning. By tomorrow, everyone would know. The daughter of the ghost had picked up her father's rifle, and she was never, ever going to be invisible again. And standing there in the rotor wash with her whole world remade around her, Ava was surprised to find that the thing she felt was not fear. It was relief. They came back through the gate at dusk, and the whole base was waiting. Word travels faster than any convoy. By the time Ava Carter's vehicle rolled through the wire, every soul on Forward Operating Base Liberty knew some version of what had happened in the Escheron Valley, and they had come out of the tents and the chow hall and the motor pool to see it for themselves, to see the communications specialist who had cleared 2 ridges and a machine gun nest with a bolt-action rifle. And they lined the road in a silence so complete you could hear the engines ticking as they cooled. Ava climbed down with her father's rifle across her back. 9 days ago, these same men had watched Ryan Kane knock her water over and call her a mail slot with a haircut, and they had laughed, and she had lowered her eyes and said nothing. Now not one of them was laughing. Now they parted in front of her like water, and their eyes followed her, and there was something in those eyes she had spent her whole life making sure no one would ever aim at her. They were looking at her the way you look at someone you're going to tell your grandchildren about. She did not lower her eyes. That was the thing she noticed about herself walking through that gauntlet of stairs. The old Ava would have shrunk, would have wanted the ground to open, would have hated the attention worse than she'd ever hated Kane's contempt. But that Ava was gone. She walked down the center of the road with her chin level and her father's rifle on her back, and she met their eyes one after another, and she was not ashamed of a single thing she was. But underneath the calm, the eye was working. Because somewhere in this crowd of men who were looking at her like a legend, one of them had sold the convoy. One of them had traded Whitmore's life for something. And that man was watching her too, right now, and smiling, and wondering how much the dying corporal had managed to say before the medevac took him away. 0119, the day of the ambush was over, and the hunt for the traitor had begun. Commander Mitchell met her outside the command tent. He was a serious man, and he looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something that made a murmur run through the watching crowd. He came to attention and returned her non-existent salute with one of his own. Specialist Carter, he said. I've read the preliminary reports. I've heard Chief Kane's account 3 times because I didn't believe it the first 2. He shook his head slowly. I owe you an apology. You stood in my briefing tent and you told me that valley was a trap, and I noted it and moved on because I could not imagine that a communications specialist could outread my intelligence section. I was wrong. Men died because I was wrong. I will carry that. He paused. But right now, I need you to walk into that tent and tell me everything. Because I've got a valley full of dead enemy fighters who had our exact route and timing, and that is not something the enemy guesses. That is something the enemy is given. Ava's pulse did not change, but everything in her went sharp and cold. Mitchell had seen it too. He wasn't part of it. Reyes had been right about that much. Sir, she said, Before I tell you anything in the open, I need to ask you one question, and I need you to think carefully about how many people can hear the answer." She kept her voice low. "Who assigned the forward relay position for this convoy, the tasking that put me in the center of the valley? Whose signature is on it?" Mitchell frowned. "Why Bob?" "Because Corporal Reyes told me something before the medevac took him," Ava said. "And if he's right, the man who assigned that relay position is the same man who received a flagged report about an unauthorized transmission 2 nights ago. A transmission going out on a channel that shouldn't have been active. And instead of acting on it, he buried it, and then he built a convoy mission around the leak he was supposed to report." Mitchell went very still. "That's a serious accusation, Specialist." "It's not an accusation yet, sir. It's a thread. I want your permission to pull it." She held his eyes. "I'm a communications specialist. Give me access to the transmission logs in 1 hour, and I'll bring you proof, or I'll bring you nothing and you can forget I ever said a word. But if I'm right, there is a man on this base who got 7 of your soldiers killed and is standing out there right now watching us talk, deciding whether he needs to make me disappear before I can prove it." 0122. Mitchell looked at her for a long moment, and Ava watched him weigh it, watched the careful man in him, war with the commander who had just lost soldiers, and she saw the moment the commander won. "You'll have your access," Mitchell said quietly, "and you'll have it quietly. As far as anyone outside this tent knows, you're being debriefed on the engagement. Nothing more." He glanced past her at the crowd, at the officers standing at the edge of it. "Who assigned the relay, you asked me? I'd have to check the tasking order to be sure." A muscle worked in his jaw. "But I can tell you who briefed it to me as a routine communications requirement. Who told me the dead ground would eat the signal and we'd need a forward relay in the valley floor." He looked back at her. "Major Elliot Voss, my operations officer." The name landed exactly where Reyes's whispered name had landed hours ago, and it fit perfectly, and Ava felt the whole shape of the thing lock into place. "That's the name Reyes gave me," she said. Major Elliot Voss. Ava had seen him exactly twice in 9 days. A smooth, polished, well-liked officer, the kind of man who remembered everyone's name and shook everyone's hand, the kind of man whose confidence read his competence. He had been in the briefing tent the day she'd warned them about the valley. She remembered now. She remembered him being the one who'd first described the sector as cold quiet, 3 weeks of nothing. She remembered him being very reasonable, very calm, very persuasive about why the mission was safe. She remembered thinking at the time that he was too calm, that his hands, unlike Kane's, hadn't shaken at all, that he was the only man in the room reading the situation as easily as she was. She'd assumed it was competence. Now she understood it was something else. He hadn't been afraid of the valley because he'd known exactly what was waiting in it. "I need that log," Ava said. The comm shop was empty when she got there. Boyle sent off on Mitchell's orders to check the perimeter relays, and Ava sat down at the terminal she knew better than anyone on the base and went to work. Reyes had said he logged the transmission and flagged it. If that was true, there would be a record, and even if Voss had gone in afterward to delete it, deletion on a military network wasn't deletion. It was concealment, and concealment left fingerprints for anyone patient enough and good enough to look. Ava was both. She had spent 11 years being twice as good as she needed to be so nobody would look at her twice, and now every hour of that hidden excellence bent toward one purpose. 0131. She found the gap first, not the transmission, the gap where the transmission had been. A 9-minute window in the logs from 2 nights ago on the overnight shift Reyes had covered for Boyle, where the automated timestamp sequence skipped. The system logged continuously. It did not skip. Unless someone with administrator access had gone in and pulled a block of records out by hand, sloppily leaving the sequence numbers to tell on him. "There you are," Ava murmured. "There's the hole where you buried it." But a hole wasn't proof. A hole was suspicious. She needed what had been in the hole. 0140. She went into the redundant backup the mirror archive that most operators forgot existed because it was slow and clunky, and never used the archive that a man in a hurry, a man who assumed he was smarter than the support staff, would never think to scrub. And there in the mirror untouched was the 9 minutes he'd deleted from the primary. An encrypted burst transmission, outbound, 2 nights before the convoy, on a channel assigned to no legitimate traffic. And the authentication header, the one thing you cannot fake without the credentials, carried the login of the account that had originated it. Voss, Major Elliot Voss, and more, because Reyes had done exactly what he said. There appended to the log was Reyes' flag, his note, his report of a suspicious outbound transmission, time-stamped and routed up the chain to the operations officer, to Voss himself. The very man who'd sent it had received the report of it, and then he'd deleted the primary log and let the mission roll. Ava sat back in the chair and let out a slow breath. She had him. "You sold them, Bosch," she said to the empty room. "You sold Whitmore. You sold all of them. And you put me in the middle of your kill zone because a warm body at the relay made your trap look like a mission. Talking to yourself, Specialist 0143. Ava did not startle. The eye had caught the shift in the light at the tent flap a full second before he spoke, and her body had gone still and ready in the way her father had trained into her before she could read. Major Elliot Voss stood in the entrance of the comm shop, and he was smiling, and there was a pistol held loose against his thigh. "You're good," Voss said pleasantly, stepping inside, letting the flap fall closed behind him. "I'll give you that. Better than good. I watched the reports come in from the valley, and I did not believe them. A communications specialist 7 confirmed solo with a bolt gun." He shook his head. "Do you have any idea how badly you complicated my day, Carter? You were supposed to die in that valley. Quietly, along with everyone else. A tragic ambush enemy. Intelligence? No survivors to ask inconvenient questions. Instead, you turned it into a story that half the base is telling, and now here you are in my comm shop at my terminal at 2 in the morning. His smile thinned. "Which tells me the corporal talked before the bird took him, and which tells me you found what you came looking for." "I found all of it," Ava said. Her voice was perfectly level. "The transmission, the gap where you deleted it, the backup you didn't know about. Reyes's flag routed straight to your account." She did not move. "It's already copied, Major. It's not just on this terminal. So whatever you're thinking of doing with that pistol, it doesn't unmake the proof." Voss's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes did. "Copied where?" "Somewhere you'll never guess and can't reach," Ava said. "Because I've spent 11 years being invisible, Major, and I promise you I am much better at hiding things than you are." 0145. The two of them held there, the traitor and the shield, and Ava read him the way she'd read the ridgeline, and she saw the calculation running behind his pleasant face. He was weighing it. Kill her and hope she was bluffing about the copy. Or don't and lose everything. "Why?" Ava said. She wasn't stalling. She wanted to know. "They trusted you. Whitmore trusted you. Why?" Voss's face flickered, and for just a moment, the pleasant mask slipped, and underneath it was something small and bitter and rotten. "You wouldn't understand. You think this is about country, about the men. It's about the 20 years I gave and the promotions that went to louder men, the Canes of the world, the tip of the spear that gets the medals, while men like me do the actual thinking that keeps them alive." His voice tightened. "I was owed. And when someone finally offered to pay what I was owed in exchange for a little information that was going to leak eventually anyway, I took it. And it would have worked. It would have been clean." The pistol came up, leveling at her chest. "It still can be. One more tragic loss. The hero of the valley killed cleaning her weapon. Nobody questions the paperwork of a grieving command." "You're not going to shoot me, Major," Ava said quietly. "And why is that?" "Because your hands are shaking," Ava said, "and mine aren't." 0146. It was true. She could see the fine tremor in his grip, the tremor of a man who did his killing at a distance, through a transmission, through a leaked route, a man who had never once looked another human being in the eye and pulled a trigger. And she thought of her father, of the 2-inch shot at 200 meters of the calm that lived at the bottom of her breath, and she knew with absolute certainty that Elliot Voss did not have it and never would. "You've never done it up close," she said. "Have you? You sell men from behind a desk. You leak routes and delete logs and let other people do the dying. But you've never had to stand 3 feet from someone and decide. And you're deciding right now, and your hands are telling on you, and you know it." She took one slow step toward him. "I've killed 7 men today, Major, every one of them to protect someone else. I know exactly what it was and exactly what it's worth. You have no idea. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to put the pistol down because the proof is already gone from this room, and shooting me only adds a murder to a treason charge and takes away the only mercy you have left. Stay back, Voss said, and his voice cracked and the pistol trembled harder. Or, Ava said, taking another step, her eyes never leaving his. You can pull that trigger, and Master Chief Hayes and Chief Kane, who are standing right outside that tent flap, because I asked them to be there 10 minutes ago, will hear the shot, and you'll die on this floor tonight instead of facing what you've earned. Either way, Major, you lose. The only thing you get to decide is how. 0147. It was a gamble. Hayes and Kane were outside. She had arranged it, but a single shot could still kill her before they crossed the distance. She knew that. She had done the math. And she had decided the math anyway because a shield does not flinch, because Whitmore was dead, and Reyes had almost died, and someone had to be the one to stand between this rotten man and the truth, and there was no one else. There had never been anyone else, there was only her. Voss stared at her over the shaking pistol. And then the tent flap ripped open, and Hayes and Kane came through it fast and hard. And Voss's nerve, the nerve of a man who had never once done his own killing, broke completely. The pistol clattered to the floor. Kane had him on the ground and cuffed before the weapon stopped spinning. And Hayes scooped up the pistol, and Voss was face down in the dirt of the comm shop, making sounds that weren't words, and it was over. It was over. You all right? Hayes asked, crossing to her, gripping her shoulders, searching her face. Ava, are you all right? I'm fine, she said. And she was. Her hands were steady. Her hands were always steady. Kane hauled Voss to his feet. The major, who had traded his own men for a grievance and a payment, looked at Ava with something between hatred and disbelief. He spat. Your support staff. You're nobody. How did a nobody take me apart? Ava looked at him for a long moment. That was always your mistake, Major, she said. You thought nobody meant harmless. It never did. It just meant nobody was looking. And she turned her back on him, which was its own kind of verdict, and walked out of the tent into the cold desert night. 0151. The stars were very bright over Forward Operating Base Liberty. Ava stood alone for a moment in the open, her father's rifle across her back, and she breathed the cold air and let the last of it drain out of her, the tension of 9 days and one impossible morning and one traitor's pistol, all of it gone. Hayes came out and stood beside her, and for a while neither of them said anything. They'll court-martial him, Hayes said finally. With what you found, there's no wriggling out of it. Treason murder, the whole weight of it. Whitmore's family will get the truth. That matters, Ava. To people like them, in the dark years that are coming, the truth is going to be the only thing that helps. He was quiet a moment. You gave them that. You could have stayed nobody. You could have let it disappear. You didn't. I couldn't, Ava said simply. Not anymore. Hayes nodded slowly. Then he reached into his jacket, and Ava thought for a moment. He had another letter, but it was only his hand empty, and he laid it on her shoulder. There's going to be a lot of attention now, he said. Command's going to pull your file. There are people, serious people, who are going to look at what you did in that valley and what you did in that tent, and they are going to want you. Not in a comm shop, in the teams, or somewhere quieter and sharper than the teams. The kind of place your father worked. He looked at her carefully. You don't have to say yes. You've kept a promise for 11 years, and if you want to keep keeping it, if you want to hand him back the rifle and go be nobody again, there is no shame in it. Not after today. You've earned the right to choose. 0153. And there it was, the choice her whole life had been building toward. Ava reached into her breast pocket and drew out her father's letter, and she unfolded it in the starlight, and she read the last lines again, the lines she had read that morning in the valley and would read every day for the rest of her life. You are not my sin, Ava. You are my redemption. You are what I would have been if I'd been a better man. Be safe, she said, and you were never going to be safe by being nobody. You were only ever going to be safe by being exactly who you are, all the way without shame standing between the people who need you and the ones who'd hurt them. She folded the letter and put it back over her heart. She thought about her mother in the hospital bed, terrified, gripping her hand. Promise me you'll be nobody. Be safe. Be nobody. And she understood finally completely that her mother had loved her enough to ask the wrong thing, and that keeping a promise built on fear was not the same as honoring the love underneath it. She could honor her mother's love. She could be safe, but not by being nobody. Never again by being nobody. When I was 5 years old, Ava said my father took me up the ridge behind our house and taught me to read the wind in the grass. And he asked me every time the same question. He'd say, "What do you see, Ava? Not what you're looking at. What do you see?" She looked out at the dark shapes of the base at the men still awake and talking about her in low voices at the vast night beyond the wire. For 11 years, I made myself stop seeing. I made myself blind on purpose because seeing led to the rifle, and the rifle led to everything my mother was afraid of. But you can't unmake the eye, Master Chief. You can only decide what you pointed at. And what are you going to point it at? Hayes asked quietly. Ava Carter turned and looked at the old man who had carried her father's letter for 11 years, waiting for the day she would finally become who she was born to be. "The people who need a shield," she said, "for as long as I'm able to stand between them and the ones who do them harm. That's what I see now. That's what I've always been for. I just spent 11 years too afraid to look at it." Hayes smiled, and it was a tired smile and a proud one, and his eyes were wet. "He'd be proud of you," he said. "I know he would. I knew him better than almost anyone alive, and I am telling you, Daniel Carter would be so proud he wouldn't be able to speak." "He already told me," Ava said, and she pressed her hand flat against the letter over her heart. "He told me 11 years ago. I just had to wait until today to hear it." 0156. The wind moved across the base, the same wind she'd been reading since she was 5 years old, and Ava Carter lifted her eyes to the ridgeline, out beyond the wire, out of old habit, out of the habit that had given her away on her very first day, and this time she did not fight it. This time she let the eye open all the way, and she looked, and she was not ashamed, and she was not afraid. The quiet soldier no one had noticed was gone. She had walked onto that base 9 days ago. Invisible, protected, forgotten. A woman who had spent 11 years teaching the whole world to overlook her. And in 18 minutes in a valley, and in one more minute in a tent with a traitor's pistol trembling at her chest, she had become something the men of Forward Operating Base Liberty would never be able to unsee. They had thought she was nobody. They had been wrong about everything. The war had not revealed Ava Carter. The war had created her. And the daughter of the ghost standing alone under the desert stars with her father's rifle on her back and her father's blessing over her heart would never be invisible again. The story of the Ashuran Valley did not stay in the Ashuran Valley. It traveled the way true stories travel, among soldiers quietly at first, then everywhere at once. It went up the chain in official reports and sideways through the ranks in low voices over cold coffee. Within a week, men on bases Ava Carter had never set foot on knew the name and the shape of what she'd done, even if they got half the details wrong. The communications specialist who cleared 2 ridges in a machine gun nest with a bolt-action rifle. The ghost daughter, who'd been hiding in plain sight. The nobody who turned out to be the most dangerous person on the base. And the man who had traded his men for a grievance and a payment. Major Elliot Voss learned exactly how far the story had traveled when he sat in a bare room in front of a panel of officers who had read every line of the evidence Ava had pulled from a backup archive he had been too arrogant to scrub. Ava was there for the hearing. She hadn't wanted to be. Hayes had insisted. "You need to see it end," the old Master Chief told her. "You carried the weight of finding it. You should be in the room when it lands on him. Not for revenge, for Whitmore. Somebody who loved that man should watch justice happen with clear eyes, and you're the closest thing to that in this whole command." So she went, and she sat in the back, still and quiet in the way she had always been. But the quiet was different now, and everyone in the room knew it. When Voss was brought in, his eyes found her almost at once, and Ava did not look away, and it was Voss who finally dropped his gaze. The evidence was overwhelming. The transmission with his authentication header. The 9-minute gap in the primary log where he'd deleted it. The pristine copy in the backup mirror. Reyes's flag routed to Voss's own account, buried and ignored. And Reyes himself alive, stabilized, testifying by video from a hospital bed with his legs saved, describing the suspicious overnight transmission he'd reported to the operations officer 2 nights before the convoy rolled. When the presiding officer asked how the leak had finally been uncovered, the record showed a single line that Ava would think about for the rest of her life. Discovered and documented by specialist Ava Carter Communications, whose technical work recovered evidence the accused believed destroyed. Whose technical work, not whose marksmanship, not whose famous father. Her work. The thing she was good at that had nothing to do with a rifle. She had spent 11 years being twice as good as she needed to be, so no one would look at her, and in the end, it was that hidden excellence, not the shooting, that brought down the man who'd gotten 7 soldiers killed. Voss was convicted on every count. As they let him out, he stopped beside her chair just for a moment and looked down at her with the last of his bitterness. "You ruined everything," he said. "You were supposed to be nobody." "I know," Ava said. She didn't stand. She didn't raise her voice. "That's what everybody kept telling me. It turns out they were all wrong, including you, especially you." And that was the last time Ava Carter ever spoke to Elliot Voss. The other thing that traveled was harder to name, and it changed the base more than any court-martial. Ryan Cain changed. It didn't happen all at once, and it didn't happen with a speech. Ava distrusted men who apologized with speeches. It happened in small things, in the way Cain started showing up at the comms shop to actually ask about the equipment. His men's lives depended on the tedious, quiet details he'd spent his whole career considering beneath him. It happened in the way he stopped talking about the tip of the spear and started talking about the shaft, the support, the parts that didn't get medals and kept the spear from shattering. It happened in the way the junior operators, who had laughed with him 9 days ago, watched him treat the support staff with a new and careful respect and quietly started doing the same. One evening, about 2 weeks after the Valley, Cain found Ava alone outside the comm shop, cleaning her father's rifle in the last of the light. He stood there a while, not saying anything, until she looked up. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this," Cain said, "and every version comes out wrong. So I'm just going to say the true part and let it be ugly." He took a breath. "Whitmore had 2 kids, girls, 6 and a 9. I've known them since they were born. And I keep thinking that you stood in that briefing tent and you told me exactly what was going to happen, and I laughed at you in front of everybody. And if I'd shut my mouth and listen, those girls would still have their dad." His voice went rough. "I don't know how to carry that, Carter. I've been doing this a long time, and I don't know how to carry that." Ava set down the rag. She looked at him for a long moment. "You don't put it down," she said quietly. "That's the answer, and it's the only honest one. You don't get to put it down. You carry it. You carry Whitmore every day, and you let the weight of him make you a man who listens the next time somebody says something you don't want to hear." She held his eyes. "That's what it's for, Chief. The guilt. It's not there to break you. It's there to change you. If you let it change you, then Whitmore's death buys something. If you just drown in it, it buys nothing. So carry him, and listen next time. That's how you honor a man you failed." Cain was quiet for a long time. "My father told me something like that once," he said finally. "I didn't understand it until now." He looked at the rifle in her hands, at the name on the receiver. "Your dad taught you that too, I'm guessing." "Everything I know that's worth knowing," Ava said. "My father taught me. I just spent 11 years pretending he hadn't." Cain nodded slowly. Then he did something that would have been unthinkable 9 days earlier. He came to attention and he saluted her, and this time there was nothing hollow in it, nothing performed. It was one soldier acknowledging another fully, without reservation. "For what it's worth," he said, "and I know it isn't worth much coming from me. I'm glad you're not nobody, Carter. I'm glad you never were." The offer came exactly as Hayes had said it would. Serious people from her quiet place had read her file and watched what she'd done and wanted her. Not in a comm shop, somewhere sharper. The kind of work her father had done, but pointed differently, the way she had told Hayes she wanted to point the eye. Towards standing between the people who needed a shield and the ones who'd do them harm. They gave her time to decide. And Ava, for the first time in 11 years, did not decide out of fear, either the fear that had made her promise her mother she'd be nobody, or the fear of what she might become if she said yes. She decided out of something clearer. The night before she gave her answer, she sat alone and took out her father's letter, worn soft now, from her own hands, and she read it one more time. And then she did something she had not done in 11 years. She spoke to her mother. "I know you were scared, Mama," she said into the dark. "I know you asked me to be nobody because you loved me, and you couldn't stand to lose me the way you lost him. And I kept that promise for 11 years. I swear I did. I kept it every single day." She pressed the letter to her chest. "But there were men dying in a valley, and I was the only one who could stop it, and being nobody wasn't going to keep me safe. It was just going to make me a person who watched people die and did nothing. That's not what you wanted for me. You wanted me to live. And I finally understand that I can't live by being nobody. I can only live by being all the way myself. Her voice steadied. Dad was right. You asked the wrong thing because you were afraid. But underneath the wrong thing was love, and I'm going to honor the love. I'm going to be safe by being exactly who I am, and I'm going to use everything he gave me to make sure other people's mothers don't have to sit where you sat. That's the promise I'm keeping now, Mama. The real one, the one underneath the words. She sat with that a while in the quiet, and the quiet did not feel like loss anymore. It felt like peace. In the morning, she gave her answer. Yes, on her terms, pointed her way as a shield and never as a hunter. And the serious people from the quiet place looked at the conditions she set, and to their credit, they agreed to every one because people who are that good at reading others could see they were not getting a weapon. They were getting a protector who happened to be lethal, and that was a rarer and more valuable thing. Hayes drove her to the airfield himself on the day she left. They didn't talk much on the way. There wasn't a lot left to say that hadn't been said. But at the airfield, before she shouldered her bag, the old Master Chief stopped her with a hand on her arm. I made your father a promise, he said, on a rooftop 11 years ago. He asked me to find you if the war ever reached you, and to be near you and to tell you it was all right. His weathered face worked. I've kept it. It took 11 years, but I kept it. And I need you to know that I've never been prouder of anything in my life than I am of being the man who got to hand you his letter and watch you become who he always knew you'd be. His voice broke. He'd be proud, Ava. But more than that, he'd be at peace, because the thing that hollowed him out, the deciding, the being the one who has to choose you, carry it lighter than he ever could. You carry it as a gift instead of a wound, and that means the ghost can finally rest. You gave him that. Do you understand you gave your father peace 11 years after he died? Ava did understand, and she pulled the old man into an embrace hard, the way she'd held her mother's hand, the way she'd gripped Hayes's hand on the crown of the North Cap. And for a moment, the two of them stood there at the edge of the airfield, the last living link to Daniel Carter and the daughter who had finally become his redemption. Thank you, she said into his shoulder, for carrying it, for waiting, for being the one who knew. It was the honor of my life, Hayes said. She pulled back. She wiped her face once, and then she was steady again. Steady the way she was always steady, and she shouldered her bag, and she settled her father's rifle across her back where it belonged, where it would always belong now. Take care of yourself, Master Chief, she said. Go take care of the world, Carter, Hayes said. That's your job now. Ava Carter walked out toward the aircraft, and she did not look back, and she did not lower her eyes, and out beyond the wire, the ridgeline caught the morning light, and she lifted her gaze to it one last time, out of the old habit, the habit that had given her away on her very first day on the base, but she wasn't giving anything away anymore. There was nothing left to hide. She was the daughter of a legend. She was a shield for the people who needed one. She was a woman who had kept the truest promise underneath all her broken ones. And she was at long last exactly and completely herself all the way, without shame and without fear. The quiet soldier no one had noticed had walked into that base carrying a dead woman's fear and a dead man's legacy, and she was walking out of it carrying only who she was. And Ava Carter, the ghost daughter who had surpassed the legend on the day it mattered most, would never be invisible again.